This is some guy on Twitter. He has a lot of takes, usually against car dependency and car-dependent infrastructure and sprawl. This is their replies. Unfortunately, a majority of the replies and comments you see from urbanism and anti-car dependency pages and or just people who advocate for stuff like this, well, the comments for these places are usually going to look like this. Today I'd like to explore this aspect of urbanism, more specifically cycling urbanism, and make a video or two, or maybe even a few eventually, about the so-called dangers without bias. A common argument these days, usually by grifters or people being paid generously to say contrarian talking points, is that e-bikes and cyclists need to be limited due to their recklessness and danger to themselves and others. Now, for full transparency, I don't have a PhD, associate's degree, or even a bachelor's. And without giving away an autobiography's worth of information, about the extent of my education is a couple college reading and writing credits from high school and a high school diploma. I'm just really passionate about living in a city that doesn't try to kill me 24/7, and optimistically for a future in which I and my family and friends are not forced into an automobile subscription to get to the places we would like to go to. Optimistic, I know. But anyways, to get back on track, I'd like to, before reading any articles about vehicular crimes and manslaughter, I'd like to explain a little bit about my view on this mostly fabricated e-bike outrage. It is entirely bereft of absolutely any intelligent thought. Something, had I not known any better, I'd believe was conjured from a thing brainless that could still imagine things into our realm, but that can only peer into an entirely different reality from ours, a reality filled of absurdism, but it can manifest that absurdism into our reality, like some kind of cosmic horror jester, I suppose, meant to mend our timeline into something impossibly silly and irrational. Alright, I'll stop trying to be some watered-down H.P. Lovecraft and put away my colorful and mildly pretentious imagination for a bit. I'd like to ask you personal, libertarian, Republican, liberal, absurdist, anarchist, whatever else you could label yourself. I'd like to ask, and would appreciate serious consideration, although I would never know, do you personally know of anybody that has been killed by an e-bike, or even just a non-motorized, non-electric bike? Now, I don't mean to be presumptuous, but I'm willing to guess the answer is no. But if I ask you whether or not you know somebody like a friend, or a friend of a friend, or a family friend, or a family member, or any number of other associated people in your life, who have been killed by a car, I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that unfortunately, many of you probably do have some story relating to a motor vehicle accident or full-on lethality that has impacted you quite severely, or, again, somebody within your circle. I will try to limit the number of personal examples, as I don't want this entire video to just be jam-packed with unreliable and easily scrutinized anecdotal evidence. However, I will add for a quick second that in my entire life thus far, I have experienced countless heartbreaking atrocities involving vehicular manslaughter and just general negligence behind the wheel, causing the death of some people that I know or from people who I don't know, but they're friends of friends. I have yet to encounter a single death directly caused by impact or in any other form from an e-bike, and especially from a normal non-electric bike. Now, it is at this point in the video that people on either side, varying depending on which side you're on, would probably cut me off and explain how they agree with me thus far, but this has nothing to do with the fact that bicycles should not be on the streets, and an even more extreme anti-urbanist might add that cycle lanes are a waste of money and it's just a hobby. The thing is, we still have access to information from a now bygone era. Information easily accessible to anybody curious enough who would want to get the facts right. Here we have Google's archive for old newspapers, articles, and a lot of other interesting things. But for this video, newspapers and old bits of other old literature is all I will personally need, more or less. I'd like to take a brief look at this particular random collection of old 1896 articles. A majority of what's written in this collection is not particularly relevant to this video. However, we do find here, quite a ways down, the mention of cycle paths and their importance, alongside wagons. Now this is interesting, but the important thing to note here is the age of the article, 1896, which is around the time that automobiles were becoming commercially available within the United States. We can even see in this article here, these two mysterious young gentlemen were bicycle mechanics in 1893. Why is this part important? Well, it's important because a long-running myth that many, for lack of a better word, entitled motorists really love to latch onto these days is that cyclists do not belong on the roads. Now this, to me, speaks to the sheer level of entitlement of motorists. Undeniable evidence that bicycle paths existed before cars in the form of actual archived articles. And as basic as this may seem, as obvious as it may seem to many, I feel like I still have to point out, bicycles were first in this country, before cars. People used bicycles first, quite simply. Or they walked, or they used horse and carriage, or many other alternatives to cars during this time period. And this to me should be the golden grail. I shouldn't have to continue, because also on average motor vehicles kill more people each year than bikes. Bikes predate automobiles on America's roads, so I have to ask again, just from sheer curiosity, why don't cyclists belong on the roads when they were among the first to use these roads? It seems to me that a different form of transportation took over as the parasite, if I'm being completely honest here. There's a few more anti-urbanist arguments against cycling as a whole that basically say not everybody wants to cycle in the cold. My car provides warmth for me in the winter. The car can take me farther. I won't dwell on these too much, as basically the entirety of Norway alone disproves the claim that people won't cycle in the cold. And as far as cars being able to take you farther, well, people on average are not taking on long distances every day, and most trips are actually quite short, taking place within around 20 kilometers or roughly 12 to 13 miles. And this issue could also be resolved by just not sprawling out. But I suppose that is a topic that has already been driven into the ground by other people with far greater credentials on these topics than I. Roads designed to allow motor vehicle access around the city only, and not allowing much access directly inside the city. I fail to see how this is a bad thing. This implementation clearly works in a variety of other countries and cities all over. The time it takes for a motorist to drive a little ways longer in a circle, rather than having a direct shortcut through the city, is negligible. The time you'd save cutting directly through the city in your motor vehicle, rather than just driving around the city, is effectively meaningless, and that time does not matter. It is severely narcissistic, egotistical, and possibly even in many cases sociopathic, to believe that your car is more important than the many people all with lives equally as important as yours, with their own emotions and dreams and livelihoods, and their health that they also have to take care of. Everybody ultimately wants different things. Obviously, some people will simply have a preference towards driving, and I believe that's fine, but to me, it seems a little silly that many of the people, and again, not to use anecdotal evidence for all of this video, but it seems to me that a majority of the people I interact with, when I try to have a discussion about cars having a right to exist in certain places, more specifically rural places, and possibly working towards banning them from cities, this sparks more outrage than you would expect, considering, by all means, I feel like it is a reasonable conclusion, a reasonable idea to have, and it baffles me. It baffles me that this simple idea, this simple thing I think we should work towards, gets people so angry. I do know some people have their preferences, and some people will always want to drive. They should live in the places where public transportation and pedestrian paths and overall walkability is not as important, or cannot be done as sustainably, or cannot be done reasonably. I myself would never drive again if I did not have to, and I am trying to work towards moving somewhere where I don't have to drive. I think in a world where places like Singapore, Japan, even parts of the United States, depending on where you live, the Netherlands, and a countless list of other places I could name off, prove without a shred of doubt, with absolute certainty, that you can build to accommodate everybody, and that you should do that. It seems though that one group just simply doesn't want to share. And with that, I would like to go over the statistics for the day. As I go into Google and type in a very simple "people killed by motorists today," we can see the verdict here. It's not looking good for motor vehicle lethalities. But let's be fair. Let's type in "people killed by bicycles today." The verdict? Not a single one of these up front reveal an e-bike or a non-electric bike killing anybody. That is all. Have a nice day.